right. We should be live. Hello and welcome, Just a Family. I am your host, Melissa Krechler, as I am trying to move everything around so I can see what we're doing. Welcome. And today's episode is about reconnecting to yourself through nature, which is a ridiculously impactful topic. I think that so many of us in society today decide that nature is a great way to reconnect, and who better to tell that story than our guest host, Mark Matz. And I'm going to say Matz because I will butcher your name if I try to say anything else. So I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Totally understandable. It's a doozy of a name. So most people stop at Matz, the first syllable. So it's how it goes. But my name's Mark Matzeldelaflor, and Matz is where it stops. And thanks for having me on, Melissa. This is a topic obviously near and dear to my heart. It's what my whole life is focused around, and helping people heal through nature. And my background is I was a Navy SEAL, got out of the service, and had a lot of friends kind of lose their lives to suicide and loss of passion, or go down some roads that aren't very good. And through my reflections and reconnection, nature was the ultimate healing tool. And that's what my organization is built around, is the nonprofit Guardian Grange, to help facilitate veteran healing through working in nature, whether that's regenerative agriculture, environmental restoration, doing hikes, getting out to the ocean, doing cleanups, and building community around that goodwill. So kind of the theme is really to use our natural environment as the medicine, so to speak, to heal ourselves together. And it's something that I feel anyone who walks into nature just instantly recognizes, like or feels, is that there's a healing aspect to just being outside of the busyness of life, or the grid, or these electronics that have value, but it's very easy to get sucked into the worlds that detach us from being grounded in reality. And that's really what this is all about, is just getting people connected, especially from the veteran perspective.
I spent the reason why I'm sponsoring this show is because when I first started out coaching, my passion and the reason I started was because of suicide. It was the amount of people that I was seeing taking their own lives because they weren't happy. They weren't happy with who they were. They didn't know who they were. They didn't feel like they had any other way out of those emotions, of those feelings. And that for me is a very traumatic experience. And I know how to help people before they get to that point. And that's why I started coaching in the first place. Two of my favorite musicians had committed suicide back to back at that point. My son was dealing with a lot of emotional trauma at that point and started self-harming. So there was a lot of things going on in my life that created my own business. And that really touched me, that your own situations created your business. And I know that we'll be talking to one of your friends on another episode next week. We'll be talking to one of your other, how do I word this? What would you call him? A brother?
Like another SEAL, like another team guy, or a veteran?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah. So I'll be talking to Rob on Monday.
Oh, Rob. Nice. Yeah. That's
yeah,
awesome.
And he's actually the one that connected us, right? So
yep.
At one point in my business, I know that I've gone through many different aspects of it, but men in general and veterans, there's so many different aspects to what you experience that creates that level of unhappiness. And for me as a woman, and I'm not a man, I can't speak to being a man, but I know kind of the general idea of For men, you're raised to be a certain way. You're raised to be very masculine, very not so much down to earth, but hiding your emotions, hiding how you feel, not really given an outlet to process that other than anger or physical activity, right? You're not taught to just, not all men, and I'm not speaking for all men, so I apologize if it's coming across that way, but unless you are raised to be outdoors and in nature and to feel that energy and to feel connected to it and that you're at peace in that situation, you're taught to not violently but aggressively express your emotions rather than connecting to them in a different way. And then veterans, the trauma, the trauma that veterans experience, the identity crisis that you experience, right? Because somebody in the military or the army, or I'm in Canada, so it's a little bit different here, but you eat, sleep, and live that identity that you share with all those other people. And you have to live in that identity because in a lot of cases, your life is on the line if you aren't living in that identity. So to come out of that would have been traumatizing, to come out of that and try to be, okay, well, who am I now?
Yeah, the identity is very it's very you know, specifically male energy, it's very dumb, and just Western in general is physical, like mind body connection. And then whether it's taught or just reinforced natural, like one of the natural emotive responses for men, you know, is aggression, you know, as if it's like a protector, a defensive type thing. And if that's reinforced to deal with basically anything, then, you know, sometimes that's the right tool for the job, but oftentimes it's not. And so if that's the only tool available emotionally, then it can lead to a lot of issues, whether that's in marriage or relationship or among friends or work or just life in general. I mean, I can reflect back on many times in my life, specifically like road rage, where it's like that's the default you know, emotion that comes up. And I feel like that's, you know, it's common just when you pack people and you're trying to get somewhere. But so maybe everyone can relate to that. But that rage is not helpful in the situation, even in it's not solving any problem. But when you're in that emotion, there's no, and you have no other perspective, then people just kind of become overtaken by that emotion as opposed to like being reflectively aware. And that's what I eventually did was I just one day I was like getting mad in a road rage kind of feeling, and I'm just like, this is kind of dumb, you know. I'm like, why am I even mad at someone that I don't even know for doing something on the road? And I just reflected on it, and I just stopped, you know, not to say that those emotions can't come up like when someone cuts you off, but I just kind of plan for it. And I look at like, you know, if a deer runs in front of me on the road, I'm not going to get mad at the deer. It's just what a deer can sometimes do. And that's kind of how I, you know, just reframe how I'm looking at the world. Because a lot of emotions are reflections of what's within ourselves. And that's definitely the power of, you know, being in nature. You kind of, especially whether that's alone in nature or with a group in nature, and you're just kind of being with each other, doing an activity, whether that's hiking or sitting around a fire or doing some work. There's a feeling, you know, an energy that people connect to that's beyond the physical and the mental. You know, it goes into your emotional and spiritual being, which in the West has been discounted or like put to the side like it's some artifact of the intellectual mind. And that's another non-truth that is not helpful, because people then start just going through rabbit holes intellectually in their mind of trying to figure out like maybe what's wrong with them or why they're feeling a certain way, as opposed to saying, looking at a feeling and be like, hey, this is a response to your environment, and it's a valid feeling. Now maybe it's not you know, it's not it's not the best decision to let that feeling overtake you. Or maybe there's another way to like redirect that energy, or to feel the anger and rage and then to, reflect upon it in the situation. And that's where, like, when you get to empty the mind through being in nature and just absorb life around you, that's just living and existing with no ego. Like the trees have no ego, the birds have no ego, the animals, they're just living, doing their thing. And you come to your own realizations in those environments that is beyond like what you can theorize or intellectualize. And I think going through those moments with people lets you know that you're also not alone. There's other people who are in those environments with you, and they're dealing with whatever they may be dealing with, and it doesn't even have to be spoken about. Not that it's never good to speak about things, but there's work to be done beyond words. And that's where I noticed that nature allows you to tap into the heart space, which we would call emotions, or your gut feeling, or your spiritual energy, outside of this intellectual ego and the connection to the physical. And with the military people, your survival is very rooted. It's grounded in survival, which is your physical being, and your mind, especially where I come from with, it's a combat role, and we're, fast response times, if we're in a combat situation or an ambush or an assault or something like that, where your emotions don't really, they're the lowest priority they could possibly be in those survival situations. And that's how it needs to be in a situation such as that. But in life in general, outside of like combat, which is a temporary state of existence, it's not the whole world, it's not the whole way of existing. That's something that I recognize with veterans, where it's easy, your identity is wrapped up in that. And then when you exit that environment, it still continues to be that way. So everything that is looked at a lens of like warfare, or combat. And it's not helpful. It's not helpful for like our families, or people who are trying to connect with us. And that is a difficult thing to emotionally deal with, beyond just the identity of like, you're no longer this role in this service, where you're laser focused and you come to work, even if you don't necessarily, whether you like it or not, you still have like a focus and a purpose and a reason for being alive in that moment. And a lot of times what I notice with when it gets into suicide is like that purpose kind of drifts away, and people feel just isolated and alone, and they get overtaken by some emotions that are very difficult to deal with. And the systems in place don't really have an architecture to help people navigate, or they throw like a pill at it, or even versions of like psychotherapy, where it's like people talking and trying to, again, intellectualize it from another point of view, but it's still in that mind area. And so I think that nature, gardening, watching animals, being involved in the life aspect of nurturing and providing and witnessing life growing is a very powerful like counterbalance to like, dealing in the business of death and warfare and trauma, so that's where I think it's very powerful.
I love what you do. I as soon as Robert sent the email and tagged us both, I scoped out your email, and I'm like, Guardian Grange. And so I Googled it, and I went on, and I'm like, this is definitely, he didn't think I was interested in your topic right away. And because I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
He said, my friend did sustainable living or sustainable farming to help veterans and reconnect. And I was thinking about it, and in the way he explained it, I didn't understand it at that point. So it wasn't that I had a lack of interest. I didn't understand it. So as soon as I went onto your website, I'm like, this is amazing. I love what you've done, and I love what you're doing. It's so healing for people to be able to step out of their emotions. In nature, it's this freedom. The feeling that you get in nature is just freedom. There are no rules and regulations in freedom. There are no, you have to be this or you have to be that. The expectations on you in nature are null and void. They don't qualify, because you're just being in that moment, in that place, your truest form.
Yeah.
And that's what people miss when you're talking about all the negative emotions and the negative thought processes that people go through when they're trying to reconnect with themselves, when their situations change. I know for some women, it's when you become a wife and a mother, you're not just your identity anymore. You're now responsible for these other identities, right? And you get lost in that. As a veteran, you get lost in that identity of being this person who has to respond very quickly, not follow through with any of your emotions. So you don't cope with any emotions in that point. You don't focus on any emotions in that point. You focus on doing your job and being the person you need to be in those moments. And that's a time consuming situation. So then when you come out of it, your level of coping on those emotions and the way that you maneuver through and process those emotions, that's gone. And you have to refine that. And again, I'm not a veteran. I can only speak from what I believe, and I'm a mindset expert. So this is what I like to talk about. But when you come out of that and you don't know who you are and you're drowning in the trauma that you faced, trying to reconnect with yourself, trying to reconnect with your loved ones, because now you're in a different headspace, your coping skills aren't there. You don't know how to maneuver through that. All those emotions that you're experiencing are different. And they're based on who you believe you are at that moment, how you believe you cope in that moment, and you get overwhelmed with those emotions because you don't know how to quiet them. In nature, and this is why I think you created this, is in nature, it quiets those emotions so that you can just be. Nature for you is a form of meditation. Working with nature is a form of meditation for you. Meditation isn't just sitting there going, it's not. I'm spiritual teacher. It's not. The truest form of meditation is relaxing your emotions, relaxing your body so that you can calmly process. That's the truest form of meditation. And you get that out of nature. For somebody who turns to, abusing drugs, abuse of alcohol, abuse of sex, abuse of, not even abuse, but turning to panic, anxiety, PTSD, suicide, depression, all of those are caused by a need to remove an emotion or a need to replace an emotion. There's that emotional imbalance. That's what leads to those things. And if you aren't capable or knowledgeable about how to process those emotions and reconnect to who you are and quiet them, it is devastating. And for somebody in your situation who's been through a very in-depth, a very identity, I want to say it almost removes your identity. You lose your identity in being a part of something so particular and so rigid that you don't know who you are when you come out.
Yeah, you lose your true essence of self. Like if you went back to your child self playing around, running around, like it was still a version, all of us were that, and that was a pure essence of yourself. And then as we grow up and have like responsibilities and ways of believing that we're supposed to act or interact with people or within this system, society, it builds scripts, right? And they become unconscious at a certain point, and then we start identifying with those things, those ideas, the beliefs, the thoughts. And it is important to, yeah, you're right, meditation is what this is. And people have people often have a misunderstanding of what that means. They have the like you perform there, the sitting quiet, and that's a type of meditation. It's a way of like tapping in, but it's not the only way. And what I try to do with my life is to live every moment as a meditation, where it's just calm and clear and coherent, because it doesn't mean that you're, people tend, there's the way of thinking of a meditation where it's like there's just nothing else going on, you clear all the thoughts, and that's
That's
not,
not.
it's not it. It's being able to feel what's coming in, but to not be swept up and overtaken in it. And if an emotion does become intense, or a thought that's very focused, and bringing your focus, that you can like witness it and let it kind of drift and still maintain like who you are.
Yeah. You get a choice. Negative emotions are a guarantee. Everybody's going to experience negative emotions, right? And it's how you use them, right? If you're in a meditative state, or you're living your life in a meditative, there are things that are going to still make you angry. And pardon my, there's things that are going to piss you off. Everybody gets mad about something, right? Or sad about something, or whatever negative you call a negative emotion would be, you're going to face it. But you're allowed to feel angry, you're allowed to feel sad, but whether or not you allow that emotion to overwhelm you and keep you stuck in that emotion, that's the choice. And that's what meditation helps. Absolutely, I 100% agree with you. It takes you out of that. My meditation is driving in my car, whether I'm crying, whether I'm screaming, whether I'm road raging, my music is blaring and I'm driving. That's my happy place. Meditation is finding your happy place, whether that's coloring in a coloring book, whether that's punching a punching bag, whatever it is that calms your emotions and brings you back to a state of, okay, I got this, let's figure it out now. That's when you process. That's when you change those emotions, change the triggers, change your life, and say, okay, now I can see my way out.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And it's just something that's not, it's not seen as very productive, in society, especially where everything's like go go go, get, win, profit, this, that, the other. And it's like, there's a time and place potentially for some of that stuff. But it's definitely not all there is to being a human being. Like when people are on their deathbed, they're not being like, man, I didn't get enough profit on this deal, or I didn't work hard enough to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, what's the value of your life, with the living, the expression that you are on this earth in this physical form. And the detachment from, like, lack of better terms, I'll say like emotional intelligence, where it's like the awareness of the emotions, the emotional being isn't there. A lot of times, especially with like men, it's like, oh well, emotions are this or that, but at the same time they're controlled by rage. So it's like you can pretend that the emotion isn't dictating your behavior, and you can drive into like stoicism and stuff, and there's punctuations of that. But I observe it with, being a warrior myself, and it's a pretty masculine role. And I look at people who claim to be like above it all, and it's just like, all right, I can see very clearly what emotion you're caught up in, or what emotion you're hiding from, which is also, you know another another weight, that doesn't help out when if you're hiding from, if you're taking a lot of effort to hide from encountering or dealing with an emotion. That's similar. It's like the inverse of getting too caught up and wrapped up in the ocean of emotion. And so
I like that.
going back to the nature, that's what really it does. It resets. Or even if you go out in nature just by yourself and you're just really pissed off or really sad or whatever, you can feel those very extreme energies and let them move through. So you don't necessarily like stop being angry or stop being sad immediately, but it kind of can ease, like that surge of the emotion can dwindle down, and then you can be more present as yourself, and reflect upon what goes on, whether you're consciously thinking about it or like epiphanies start coming in. It's like you may not, when you disconnect from your thought and you're just flowing in a flow state, whether that's like maybe riding a bike down a hill, where it's rocky, you're focused in that situation. Like there's a meditation there, because if you're thinking about other stuff, you're going to fall potentially down the hillside and hurt yourself. So the same thing happens whether you're just like hiking, being among people and unspoken bonding that's going on. And throughout time, like what I notice is people start recognizing they're a lot more similar than they are different, especially with like this world that loves to sow like and sell divisive headlines of like, you know, hey, here and there, this or that, you're this left or right or whatever identity it is, and you got to be like, you know, at war with the other one or very scared or fearful of these other people. And it's like humans at the base level are all kids, you know, and kids don't have any of that bullshit in their minds to wrap it up. And it's always funny how like adults are like, hey kid, you got to grow up one day, like you got to get into the real world. And it's actually moving away from the real world, because the real world is just nature. You know, if we don't even speak the same language, we can both like look at the cloud and the sky and the ocean and a piece of fruit or something and understand like what we're dealing with. And if we're connecting as human beings at that level, like, so what if I don't have a label to identify you with? If we don't speak the same language, all I can identify you with is another human being. And that's a very pure, powerful state. And that's where children come at life too. And you know, we've all been conditioned in some way throughout our growing up phase where we're taught to see things, whether that's what someone else believes or, you know, how they act or how they appear, you know, what they look like, their presence. Like these things are, they're traps of like of intellectual conscious traps where it's like we think that we can know. And you know, someone, we could call them a taxi driver, and we think that all taxi drivers are a certain way, and therefore like every time I meet a taxi driver, I'm just going to assume that they're like the last one I met. And we can go into, you know, we could apply that to any kind of more like hyperbolic identity, and it still doesn't matter, you know. And we've all, like, I know I've fallen into traps where it's like, you know, you could go to 9/11 where it's like, okay, this type of figure, this identity is the one that is what caused this. And whether that's true or untrue doesn't really matter, because every human is an individual regardless of the collective like reality that exists among human. We're all individual beings and entities with their own thoughts, feelings, emotions. And it's important to in my heart and mind and soul to see people for who they really are without all this added bullshit on top of them that we just, you know, are taught to like put on people.
Your energy, your identity is not the titles or roles that you subscribe to. Your identity is your energy. It's your hopes, it's your dreams, it's your wishes, it's your likes and dislikes. Each of us can subscribe to similar roles. We can subscribe to similar titles, but we're all unique. No one of us is going to have exactly the same beliefs, exactly the same hopes, dreams, wishes, likes, dislikes. It's all perspective. All perspective. I can tell you exactly who I believe I am, but you're going to create your opinion of me based on your perception of what I tell you and what you see. It's all subjective, but people don't understand that. And your identity is your core. It's everything about you. It's how you act, it's how you believe, and it needs to be valued. I had a comment made once, and I was shocked. I was speechless when I first heard it. And there's a famous actor, and he's Middle Eastern and very handsome. And this person thinks that he's exceptionally handsome. And all of a sudden there was a picture of him that he had posted online one day, and he was wearing a scarf around his head. And she's like, oh no, now he looks like a terrorist. And I'm like, excuse me? Just what? Really? That's what, like, he still looks handsome. He's still him. What is the difference? Because that's what you assume that they look like. Like, I had to bite my tongue because I was so, and I had that conversation with that person. But that, you're right, it is the assumption that somebody's identity is based on their culture, based on the way they look, the way they act, the way they speak. That's not your identity. It's not who you are. It's not the way that you connect to people.
Yeah, and it's like those things are like, you know, things that are true to someone, like we're all human for sure, right? So it's like we have that aspect that's like a baseline. There's no ego in that. It's just like we are what we are. And then, if someone has a sincere way of believing that aligns with the culture, that's part of them too. But if there's a lot about this culture that I don't identify with, that I've been an outsider from since I was a kid. Like, it just never felt right to me. So, someone could put that on you like, oh, you're a American male who lived in the Northeast, so therefore you fit X, Y, and Z mold. And it's very useful for people who are trying to like classify humans as like an inventory item, but it's not good for the human like spiritual development, growth, passing on good energy throughout lineages into children, and to help children become fully who they are without all this added adult bullshit thrown on top, and these identity games that are like, hey child, I know you're playing, but let's like think about this abstract concept that you have no idea what we're talking about. Like, those things are not it's not helpful. And to me, what I see is like it's an extension of unresolved trauma within people, adults. And there's a lot of conflict, which leads to like war and all kinds of stuff, and that gets passed on to children when it's unresolved in the human being. And that's where what I'm doing, is creating space for people to let go of that stuff, and to figure out and to understand and to feel who they really are, to become a pure expression of what they were created to be, why we're existing, why we're here, and to act through like the purest sense of love. Because even that word has like, in English language, has so many different meanings, but it's just like, a very respectful presence where we're respectful of each other's individuality and boundaries, but also recognizing that we're brothers, sisters, we're all family in some capacity as far as human species and life in general. Like, I look at every living thing and I'm like, man, that's pretty fucking awesome that, we have trees and fish and birds and people and many different types of people and many different types of animals. Like, that's awesome, but I don't know, it feels like in this society, like just globally, like this modern kind of civilization, like the purity and the essence and the respect for life has kind of gone away in a lot of ways. And it's just like a lot of egos are trying to focus on what they can extract from this thing, as like if it's a game to be one, like king of the hill, like there can be only one. And it's like, it's not how nature works. Like, if you go into the forest, like there's a whole forest, and that forest exists because of all the diversity of life forms within it, doing their role without any ego involved whatsoever. They're just being present and enjoying the moment. And if you can tap into that as a human being and be a participant in it, that's freedom beyond like what anyone can write about or talk about. And experiencing that is awesome. It's a like a rebirth type of process. There's a bit of a ego death and a rebirth just going into nature. I mean, you sit in nature for like a couple weeks by yourself, you're gonna you're gonna let go of some shit, and you're gonna realize some stuff too.
I love that you just said that. Normally I do in the middle of the episode, I usually do a promotion for anybody who's sponsored, right? So before we got on the live, I mentioned to you that, of course, half an hour before the show, I decided to rebrand my coaching business. So it's quite interesting that you would say that. I have turned my coaching business into a Phoenix identity, is what it's now called. And it's because we need to just set fire to all the garbage that's no longer serving us. We need to just throw it all in a trash bin, light that trash bin up, and just recreate ourselves and take back our own unique power. That's what I love. I wanted to mention the forest because you mentioned the forest and kids and what they're being taught. One of my favorite things is color between the lines. We go to school in kindergarten, preschool, nursery, whatever you want to call it. We're taught to color inside the lines, right? It has to be perfect coloring inside the lines. We're all taught to be this perfect little specimen. You give a kid a picture of a tree and says, or tell a kid to draw a picture of a tree. That tree is going to be so different than the next kid's tree. You go into nature, every tree has its own unique identity. They're not all the same. You can have two oaks side by side and they're going to be completely different. Now, I shared a lesson about a tree a while ago, and this is what humanity is becoming like this. You see a tree, a beautiful tree. Let's say a pine tree, because pine is generally with Christmas trees, right? And the whole beautiful pine. So you see a pine tree growing out in nature, and it's all by itself. It's in the middle of a field. It's beautiful. It's standing tall. It's imperfectly perfect. And it's gorgeous, right? It's flourishing. It's getting enough sunlight. It's getting enough space. It's getting enough nutrients. Now you take that same tree and you put all the other trees around it. That tree isn't going to thrive. That tree is not going to get as much nutrients. It's not going to get enough sunlight. It's not going to get enough rain. And it's going to start to grow in patches, right? You'll have a branch missing here because the other branches are encroaching. You'll have a branch missing here or half a branch because the branch from the tree above it is cutting into it. That's our peers, right? When you're confident in who you are, in your identity, in your connection to yourself, you thrive and you grow. You can have other people come and water you and give you, the nourishment that you crave. But if you're overwhelmed by everybody else's input and everybody else's opinions, and you're creating your identity based on everybody else and everything else, you're not going to thrive. You're not going to find that nourishment. And that's what it's such an easy concept to grasp. We're living in a fake humanity. Humanity right now is everybody saying, I want to be like them. I want to be like them. I want to be like this person. I'm going to, walking down the street and giving a homeless person a meal, they record it. And I've heard stories that people will go, some influencers will go, not all, so please do your research. They'll go and hand a homeless person $1,000 on camera, right? 5 minutes later, when the cameras aren't rolling, they'll take it back.
Wow. Yeah.
This is what society now is teaching us to be, is a fake humanity. We can't be genuinely ourselves. We're told we can. And the world is, people like us are standing up and saying, you can be whoever you want to be. You can step into your identity with confidence and courage and beauty. But at the same time, you've got internet warriors that try to bring you down. You've got careers, you've got situations, events, other people in your family even, who are pulling you down and saying, that's not okay. That's weird. You can't be that way. You can't, it's not right.
Yeah. Everything's commodified in this civilization, and, people who are caught up in that, which is a large chunk, many different ways. It's unconscious. Some of it's very more conscious than others, but it's like there's this artificial value placed on whatever it may be. And so people are always like selling an image or selling a widget, a thing. And like, I've seen a lot of those homeless interaction videos where, hopefully the ones I've seen, they're doing good stuff. I don't know, but I can definitely see where people can notice like, oh, you get a lot of views from that. So therefore I'm just going to go out and, oh, maybe I get $1,000. So I'm going to go to like 5 homeless people and pretend to give them $1,000 and get that much views and whatever. And to me, like, that's some internal stuff, that work that needs to be done for those people. And this this world of like social media. It's a double-edged sword, right? It's very, you can transmit and receive information, you can have cool conversations, you can share stuff, but you can also like present a very specific image and brand identity that is targeted, and we know enough about marketing and advertising to where you can, manipulate with words and get an audience to buy into a story narrative for the purpose of selling. And that's why, I think that people got to do what they got to do, but at the same time, like when someone's entire purpose for existing is to extract money, price, whatever, um it pollutes the whole energy of the person. And that's where I think money is there's something I heard where it's like money is a curse, or currency. And it kind of is, because if you wiped it off the table, if you just reset everyone's memory right away, people would be forced to like value things for what they are actually worth. To see, like, if I take a citrus, like, is that worth like $2, a buck, or is it worth like the pleasure and the enjoyment and the actual like nourishment that I get from that lemon, which, if I'm out in the desert, that lemon's worth a lot. If I've been drinking water for a while, just that water from that lemon is worth a lot. And like, so many things are polluted, even these words. Like, if you say worth, people just tend to associate a dollar sign to it, as opposed to like just a unique value as a thing, because everything has a value. Even like horse shit is useful for growing food, but if you have a whole pile of it and you're not utilizing it personally, then it becomes this thing we call waste, and we start trying to manage waste, and it throws entire like natural cycles off. And that's one of the things with like the regenerative agriculture. To me, it's just, regenerative agriculture is just moving back towards closer a natural state, because we have industrialized agriculture where it's like packed in animals, and we have excess waste, or even packed in crops where it's a monocrop and nothing else is growing around it. And so you're killing the weeds and the pests and other plant life. And it's not how nature works. And so regenerative agriculture and permaculture is moving closer to like a more biodynamic relationship of life forms. And the ultimate goal for me is like, if you take America, for example, like, there's plains, there's forests, and what was on the plains, the natural creatures were bison. They were doing their thing without any need of input for human beings, other than the interaction of, natural management. Like, they would be used for meat and goods and different things, but in a very like responsible and respectful way, where it's not just wholesale commodification and slaughter of an entire species. And it just, to look at life in a way where everything's a resource or a commodity is it's a very lacking perspective. Because again, like a tree, like, there's this tree here that's providing me shade. Like, is the tree worth the lumber that I could extract from it, or is it worth like the shade it could provide for generations and generations, and the fact that it's pulling water up to the surface to help other plants around it, and that's creating an environment that isn't a desert. So there's a lot of in my mind, that's what I'm working to do with what I call like a soil-based economy. Because it's like, we're dealing with, like, when I get in conversations, like, well, how does that, like, where's the bottom line? How does that really make sense? How are you going to do X, Y, and Z? How are you going to create like true, like, regenerative communities that, by the human behavior acting within the community, it's creating a surplus of life that has, you could attach an economic value to it. And that's why I'm just shifting like my messaging towards like, okay, let's just we can talk about an economy, but we can talk about an economy holistically. And at the end of the day, like, if you're not eating food and you don't have fresh water, like, what do you really have? You can have skyscrapers and towers and massive militaries and whatever. And it's just like, what's the point? Like, it doesn't matter if everything's dying off and being decayed, because everyone's focused on like, I think it's Buckminster Fuller. He's like, when we move from like killing to living technologies, like, then things really start to accelerate in a good way. Like, up the spiral of like human enlightenment, where it's just like, we're now, instead of like fighting for survival, like running down a spiral, like with scarcity mindset, it's like, hey, this earth provides everything we need. And if we are responsible actors, participants within this environment, like there's a reason, populations have grown, and it's because the earth is abundant. But then now we have these like perceptions of scarcity where it's like, I want to have a whole lot of stuff. And therefore, sure, from that, like, how much stuff can you responsibly um, manage or even like steward? Like, I look at ownership, right? There's this concept of ownership, which is, we own our bodies, we own certain things to a degree, pieces of land. But if you're not stewarding the land properly, like, what does your ownership supposedly even mean? And that's where I'm also trying to frame, like, as we're doing work in the natural environment, to be like, yo, whether we own something on paper or someone does, like, there's a responsible action. Just like a rabbit or a deer or a bear, they don't have title to a property, but they steward their land. They do what they need to do on that land, and they live within it, and the land is enhanced because of it. But if there was a whole bunch of bears like fighting for one piece of property because it was like beachfront real estate and they all wanted that specific view, then the bears would destroy the environment. But luckily bears don't have those egos, so they don't tend to do it. But humans do. They have this thing that's, it's not all bad, it just has become like out of balance. And so, like, our creative capacity, we can do like amazing things. We can make the most beautiful art. We can like be super, loving and philanthropic and, just helpful. Or we can create like the craziest, gnarliest war machines and just fight over shit. And I mean, it seems to be a bit ridiculous, in my mind. And especially as someone who have gone through it, like, I'm not some person who's unpegged from reality, where sometimes, there is, there is a rightful response, especially if it's defending, a person or a community or a self or a child from harm. Like, there's valid reason for conflict, but it's not a default state. And the more conflict, what I see is, like, if you poke someone, they're going to want to poke back. So if you're coming at the world of like, we need to dominate and conquer and impose our will, then you're always going to get a pushback. Because I know if someone comes and does that to me, even if they're on the right page and like, hey, Mark, you're going to do what I say right now, I'm going to default give them the middle finger and be like, no. And if they press it, then it becomes combat, right? Or it becomes court. And so for me, being like very aware and present, like going through that process of warfare, like, I would do everything in my power to not have those energies erupt, because it doesn't help out anyone. It doesn't help out the people we love or the children, or, it's just not good. So I think there's a fundamental lack of respect that stems from like these misunderstandings of like our ego or not being connected to emotions, because at the end of the day, no one enjoys getting stepped on. No one enjoys being like oppressed or hurt. And sometimes people who are, from that perspective of trauma, kind of export it out because it's a way of like offloading, like, oh, something was done to me, so I'm going to carry it forward. But as creative human beings, we break that cycle. Instead of going in loops, we start rising up the style and bringing people up with us, as we improve ourselves, because we all have work to do. But doesn't mean it has to be so much of a negative thing, like, there's nothing wrong with going through a bit of a struggle and learning from it, and then being like, oh, okay, like, if I do this action, then it makes it harder for everyone, so therefore I'm no longer going to do it, but I'm going to keep that memory in my mind, and I'm going to move forward and be improved and help my environment. So that's where I come from as far as my energy.
No, I agree. There are healthy times or needful times for conflict, needful times for whatever emotion we feel. We wouldn't feel those emotions if it wasn't true. If there wasn't a need for them at some point or another. Just, we do get caught up in them to the point where it's needless. I love again, the fact that you're doing this for nature. I think that not only for nature, it's such a mutually beneficial situation that you've created, right? Because you're giving back to not only nature, but also to people who need it, who need to feel that connection, who need to feel free and capable of being who they are and reconnecting to who they are. I absolutely love that. And I'd love to hear more before we end this episode. I'd love to hear more about your company and exactly what it is that you guys do, how people can help out, and how they can reach out.
Yeah, for sure. So the organization I started is called Gardening Grange, and it's a nonprofit. And the primary focus is to help veterans heal through their own empowered existence, and that's like working through nature, regenerative agriculture, hiking around, helping out the environment, and then building community around that, because it shifts a new refocuses purpose, especially if someone has lost it. Like, oh my God, what's my purpose for existing? And that's a whole rabbit hole tornado that someone can become very depressed within. And you can't really intellectualize yourself out of that. If you're depressed, it's very difficult to like not think about the pink elephants, that are doing the stampede. So instead, it's just like by doing something else, by turning on a new purpose, which is focused on life, that kind of helps resolve issues. And we just did an event down at our location in Escondido a couple weeks ago, and we had about 50 people show up. It was like a kickoff event, and we just had some barbecue, chatted, talked about the vision for the property, the work that needed to be done, and just that interaction was very like created a lot of positive energy, where people are like, man, I really I needed this just to get with other people, and there's no agenda. It's just like, we're coming together to do some work, to talk about some stuff, to start moving in this direction of living right. It's like doing things that enhance not only ourselves but others around us. And that's what's beautiful about human cooperation, because competition has its place too, where it's like in an isolated kind of environments where you're testing things out or having a role of play, right? But cooperation is so much more powerful, because if I take 100 people and it's every person for themselves, it's going to be a bit chaotic. But if I take that 100 people and like 25 of them decide like, we're going to work together, and we're going to try to, whatever those other 75 people are going to do, we're just going to focus on providing enough meals for ourselves and them. It kind of takes some stress off the table, and allows for time for people to interact with each other and be like, okay, well, if someone's like reaching out and helping me unsolicited, and they're not like video cameraing it for like a bunch of views or something, just like very pure interaction, like that's some powerful medicine, where it's just like, that's humans healing each other. And that's what I'm pushing to create. And I'm grateful to have like a lot of people like Robert, who's coming on next week. I think he said like he came out to that event, and we're working more closely together on this too. It has a magnetism to it. So as far as like helping out, like we're operating mostly in San Diego area and up in the Ojai area, so California. But as we expand or extend, I'm down to just chat with people who are like on the same wavelength and seeding communities elsewhere. But where we're at, obviously, volunteer, just showing up, spreading the message. We're a 501c3, so people can donate, or if people know like corporations that want to, push a bunch of tax money, towards a direction that's actually focused on doing real work, like those are ways that people can help. People have properties that they want to be like revitalized or invigorated. That's one of the things that I focus on when I'm talking to someone who's like a landowner, is like, I don't come out and say like, we're going to move from ownership to stewardship, but it's just the nature of how I am. I'm like, well, what's your vision for this place? Like, what would you like to see here? And then I just kind of work around that and weave in like okay, well, wouldn't it be cool to like start increasing our ability capacity to grow food or native plant life and to store water more efficiently in this land through vegetation and animals and to create food for us? Because I have a vision of like long term, and I guess if there's any grocery store executives, they're not going to like it, but probably won't have to worry about it. But if you grow communities in such a way where we're, responsibly stewarding our land and growing our food within a local capacity, then like the industrialized grocery stores and markets that are coming from these big centralized subsidized things becomes less of a need. And so people naturally, like if you're feeding yourself from your land, then you could use a grocery store, but you don't have to. And those things start to dwindle, or I know a lot of people like their Targets and their Walmarts and stuff, but those things become less of a necessity, and there's no need to really like fight it. It's just like by refocusing and going in a new direction that is just tapped into the natural environment, we kind of the balance kind of calibrates itself. And so that's a much longer term thing, but that's the energy that I'm putting out there, because I don't know, I feel like, Walmarts and Targets and Amazons haven't existed for that long. And is there convenience that comes with them? Sure. But at what cost is that convenience coming in? And are we really better off than when we had like small family businesses or people who just lived straight off the land? And I'm not saying that we're going backwards or rewinding to anything, but it's like we have these understandings and perspectives, and we should be able to merge like human creativity and technology in a way that it enhances and works with instead of fighting against nature. And I just know that, I mean, I don't want to fight a tornado or a tsunami. Like I know nature's going to win at all times, and it just I love like being in the forest. So it's a very beautiful thing. Or if you come to the California with the redwoods or the giant sequoias or the bristlecone pines, like those are monuments of natural life that exist because the human beings, the natives who are here for hundreds of thousands of years, who are living in such a way and using fire. We talked about fire, using prescribed fire, cultural burns to keep the space of the trees so they're not suffocating within an overgrown forest. Like that's why those giant sequoias and redwoods exist, because without the human interaction to create that synergy, those trees would have never gotten that big, and the life wouldn't have been so plentiful. So there's a beautiful story in there that I'm trying to just like live, I'm trying to like live it through, tell it, but also just live it, where it's like if we use our human creativity, we can create there has been and can be again and is in many places paradise on earth, or heaven on earth, or this concept of the Garden of Eden, which I think is the entire earth itself, because I don't see any other planets out there with water, even though people are going to like trying to do terraform Mars and the moon or whatever. It's like, doesn't make much sense when you have an earth that is producing water and life just by default. I think we should just focus on managing, working with this place a little bit better.
Sustainable. We need to keep Earth. if we keep utilizing everything and not replenishing it, Earth won't survive. I'm going to be just a bunch of humans with fake water and fake food.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I love what you're doing. We're in Canada, so it's snowy here. And so sustainable, creating our own gardens and our own markets is great in the summer and in the spring and fall. Unfortunately, we don't really have that ability necessarily all over in the winter, but I love my local farmers markets. I love them. I love getting fresh produce, fresh fruit, fresh eggs. And I love knowing that those same farmers, it isn't overpopulated. It isn't, all the animals in one place and they're creating an abundance of waste that's toxic, right? So I definitely love what you're doing. I love the process. I'd love to get involved. If you and I can hang out after this episode is done, I'd love to talk to you about ways that I can assist in any way that I can. And yeah, I do. I love the topic. I don't think there's enough support systems out there for nature, for identity, for men, and for veterans. I think that everything that you're doing here is very much needed and something that's going to help transform a lot of lives. A lot of lives.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's what I always say. Like my intention is just to do good work, or do good shit is what I like to say, just be an expression of my true self. And there's a lot of stuff to work through and no one's perfect, but we're just I think the concept of perfection is, if you look at it as like a completeness and an acceptance of your complete self, as opposed to like no flaws or errors, because you know I don't believe that scars or mistakes are make anything less perfect. I think it makes it more perfect because it makes it more complete. And so like perfection is just a process of existing in our natural state, and so that's what I'm just working for in my own self, my own development, to be a good father. We got my fiance Charity. We have a daughter coming in next month. So, I'm just trying to be the best father that I can be there, and be a good example for her growing up, to see like, what a good man and father should be, or could be, and to have that role model, and to also be able to develop and flourish as herself without any bullshit, effect of pushing her in certain directions. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And I appreciate everyone who's like gravitates towards what I'm doing, because it helps out. Even just the conversations, the talking, the energy that's going into this, just awareness is really helpful, just not just to myself, but to the mission. It's the vision.
That's one of the reasons I created the show. I didn't create the show. How do I word that? I created the show because I wanted to highlight different topics, everyday topics that are going to make people's lives happier and healthier. That's the point of the show. It isn't to promote the next thing going on. It's not to promote the fake humanity. It's inclusiveness, it's identity, it's self-development, personal development, helping people heal and grow. And it's this show for me is the future of a great humanity. That's what the show is for me. And to highlight topics like yours makes me ridiculously happy. Absolutely happy. There are two things I wanted to mention that we had talked about during the show. The first being, you had mentioned earlier in the episode about wondering what the purpose of life is, what the purpose of your existence is. And I wanted to touch on that because I'm one of those people that I know what the purpose of life is. The purpose of life is to experience. And when I say experience, it's experience everything. We're on this earth to experience, learn, and grow. Now, you can take that from a metaphysical aspect, that we're divine beings coming down here to learn our experiences so that we can help other people during this experience. You can take it as it is to experience. And when you are on your deathbed, my greatest fear of being on my deathbed is not trying. It's not that I did do something that I regret. It's not doing something and regretting not doing it. I want to experience life. I want to experience the things that make me excited. I want to experience the things that make me feel like a great human being. I want to experience the negative things that are going to help me grow into a better version of myself. Negativity, and I've coined this phrase and I will repeat it daily. Negativity is the catalyst for positive growth. You don't know that things need to change, and you don't know how to be a better version of yourself until you go through the shit. Right?
Yep.
It's just That's life. You're guaranteed three things. You are guaranteed taxes, you're guaranteed death, and you're guaranteed negativity. Those are my three guarantees of life. They all suck, but sorry, my daughter is laughing in the background. Yeah. They all suck, but they're all guarantees, and you can utilize and maneuver through every single one of them and come out the other side as a better version of yourself. And I think that what you're doing is giving people that ability to maneuver through the shit and become more connected, more loving, and more better versions of themselves.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's beautifully put. The experience and the learning and the growth is how I look at, purpose, and, being a positive just interaction. When you have those negative experiences, for me to not then export negativity around the world, but to use it as the catalyst for positive change, and that's what this is all about, like taking energy and refocusing it, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, anything else you'd like to share before we end off this episode?
No, just thank you for having me on, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I think this is a beautiful platform that you're working with and coming from. And I'm honored to be here on this chat. So thank you
very much. I'm honored to have you. My husband told me the other day, he said it's Canada's best talk show. So I'm now coining the phrase that this is North America's greatest talk show, because it's streamed everywhere and it's all inclusive. This is my baby. So if anybody wants to connect with either myself or Mark, please feel free to do so. Our links are in the description of this video podcast. Wherever you're listening or watching, they will be in the description. Please feel free to connect. I would encourage everybody to connect with Guardian Grange and think about ways to help. Even if you're not connecting with Guardian Grange, find something to connect to that gives you a purpose to give back, and truly give back, not for the fame, not for the fortune, not for you, for you and potentially for the world. I am sponsoring this episode because I'm a mindset expert, I'm an identity expert, and what I feel Mark is doing with Guardian Grange is something that I am absolutely and utterly passionate about. If you would like to work with me or interested in talking with me more about reconnecting to your identity, please go check me out at a Phoenix Identity. See, it's new title of my coaching. So of course I have to get used to it now. A Phoenix Identity. Thank you so much, Mark. I'd ask you to hold on once we're done and I stop the live so I can talk to you a little bit more.
Okay.
Thank you everybody for joining. Please like, follow, share, subscribe. Go to the website, click subscribe to the newsletter so that you can get notified of what's upcoming, what is going live, and how you can get involved in the show and connect with our co-hosts. So lots of love, just a family. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and I will see you on the next episode.